recognised as a dissident thinker on, but if you go back to Permaculture 1, you can see the emphasis that we should use and incorporate indigenous species into our permaculture design systems. And it's only really in recent decades that the very important valuing of biodiversity has actually become such an overriding single function that's come back into our urban settled environments as the one way you measure something of ecological value. Are there local indigenous species? Now, unfortunately, that view is what we call a nativist view that says a plant only has ecological value where it is native, and when it is not native, it actually has negative biodiversity value. And this is unfortunately a completely wrong notion. So it is unfortunate that in the same way that Nicola's presenting ideas that are quite challenging to people, a lot of my writing over the years has produced irate, explosive responses that permaculture is about neglecting biodiversity. Unfortunately, it's a situation where ecology, as it's been taught in our universities, especially through the Anglo-American world over the last 30 years, is being completely wrong. And then all the people trained in natural resource conservation that have set up all of the programs based on this science have diverted activity into something which is largely a sideshow. Now that's also not just from a human sustainability point of view, but also an indigenous biodiversity conservation point of view. Thankfully, what's now happening is the science is actually starting to turn around. This new field of what's called novel ecosystems. Now, a lot of peer-reviewed science is pulling the rug from under a lot of the orthodoxy about biodiversity. But if people think this is a new idea, I'd refer them back to the UN Biodiversity Convention, which makes no distinction between indigenous and non-indigenous. It does not use the terms. It uses ex situ conservation, such as zoos, gene banks, botanic gardens, and in situ conservation. Anything that is naturalised or wild constitutes having valid biodiversity value. Therefore, under the UN Biodiversity Convention, we are legally responsible for the conservation of camels. We have that sole responsibility because there are no wild camels anywhere else in the world. Now, most of the people educated in this field are clueless about this stuff. So the question is a valid question, but the frame of reference of the last 30 years of responses to that is invalid. And that is, you know, I am like very, very provocative on this area. So there's nothing inherently better about a garden full of native plants than ones full of non-native plants. But similarly, wherever possible, we would incorporate indigenous species and other Australian native species as part of functional ecosystems that support humans. You can do that more strongly on a broad-acre, large-scale basis, but as you move down into the inner zones of where people are settled, there's fewer and fewer natives in most parts of Australia that fit into those types of systems, and especially in our higher densities cities. That's a long answer.
Yeah,
it's
but
a dangerous question to ask.
But everyone's going.
Maybe one last question.